Welcome to You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. You are ambitious in life and in your career, but something is missing. You want to bring more of your passion to what you do. Because let's be honest, you pour a ton into your work, and it needs to mean more. I'm your host, Laura Eigel. I'm a mom, wife, PhD, coach, advocate, introvert, and indoor rowing fanatic. I'm passionate about living a life that's in line with my values. We'll give you the actionable tips and tools you need to lead with your values, make a difference, and have career success. The world needs more diversity and authenticity in the top jobs at organizations. Your leadership belongs there. You belong in the C-Suite. What gets you up in the morning? What drives your decisions? What do you stand for? No idea, not even sure where to start? I use my values to guide my life and career. It's the basis of how I've built boundaries for myself and stuck to them. Are you ready to dig into what matters to you? Go to thecatchgroup.com to download your free values worksheet. That's thecatchgroup.com to download your free values worksheet to get to your core values and take action on what matters most. Welcome to this week's episode of the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. Today, we are continuing our podcast series exploring each section of the Values First framework. So far in the series, we've covered the V for Values First, where we clarified your values. Next, we went through the A, which stands for audit time. We intentionally checked in on your values. After that, we went through the L, life boundaries, how building boundaries is an act of care for your values by prioritizing them. And last week, we covered the U, uplifting others. This week, we are talking about the E, experiencing conflict. Recently, I was leading a Values First leader workshop and certification, and we had a really robust conversation with leaders about conflict. There are so many types of conflict. We talked about internal conflict, task or strategy conflict, team and interpersonal conflict, conflict up and across the organization, and overall organizational conflict. So first, conflict that you're having internally. This for me happens when I'm in conflict with my own values. The go-to example I use is that my core value of achievement often conflicts with my core values of family or balance. And I know I am not alone here. Often I default to working, and that means at the expense of my other values. So balance, taking time for myself, working out, exercising, being outside, moving my body, or even time with family or friends comes at the sacrifice of working more. And I've been getting better and better at this over time, but I still fall into this trap sometimes of over-indexing on a core value of achievement. And for me, internal conflicts are sometimes my number one kind of conflict. And sometimes my own unfulfillment feels external because I'm not happy, when really we have more control over managing some of this internal conflict, which could then impact how we feel fulfilled in all other parts of our lives. So this one's a really interesting one to think through, to kind of tease apart and to figure out, where are you feeling some internal conflict right now? The next kind is task or strategy conflict. So what happens when two or more important things conflict with each other? Which one's more important? How do you decide? Sometimes it feels like we're never making the right decision, or we're always letting somebody down. And then conflict within team or relationship. So specifically with your team. So conflict maybe with a direct report, or when two people within your team might have a conflict with each other, and you as the leader need to manage or work through it to reduce the negative impacts among all of the team members. And then sometimes it's conflict that's up and across. So maybe it's with your peers or with you and your manager, and you're trying to shield your team from it, right? You're trying to provide air cover and to manage through that. And that's really hard in other ways. And then sometimes it has nothing to do with the person, but perhaps the values of the organization and how that might conflict with your values, or your team values, or a member of your team conflicts with their values with the organization. So lots of different conflicts, right? So much. And none of those conflicts really happen in a vacuum. They could be all going on at the exact same time. So how do you manage it for yourself? And then how do you do it with your team? It's a lot to think through. That's why I think it's so important to use your values to help you navigate through it. So that even if you can't control the conflict or influence the conflict, you can at least say that you stood by your values through the conflict. You consistently led with your core beliefs through your leadership throughout the whole thing. And when you can do that, that consistency is really grounding not only for you, but also for your team. Let's listen to a clip from the Experiencing Conflict section of the Values First framework from the Values First audiobook, where I share a few of my favorite tools to utilize through the multiple types of conflict. Let's take a listen.
Red flags and traps. Some call it intuition, that feeling in your gut. If something is wrong, your body has an innate reaction, emotionally and physically. You sense it. You may not be able to stop thinking about it. You may get angry or feel upset. You need to be able to pay attention to that. That important thing to you might be one of your core values, and you may not be upholding your boundaries, or you may need to put a boundary in place. How can you be attuned to your values? There will be times when you aren't living your values, when priorities get out of alignment. Find the Red Flags and Traps worksheet in your Values First workbook. Which red flags have you experienced over the last month? Red flag number 1. Be attuned when your inner warning lights go off. Can you name it? Which core value is it tied to? What is the boundary that you need to put in place? Red flag number 2. Dreading to have a tough conversation. Adhering to boundaries is hard. You will have to talk about your boundaries often. You may even have to have tough conversations with those that are crossing those boundaries. Tough conversations aren't always fun. If you find yourself dreading having a tough conversation, then that is a red flag and may mean that a boundary has been crossed. Reflect on the situation. Which value is coming up for you? Why is that important? Red flag number 3. Being less excited about a commitment you previously enjoyed. Maybe you did it to help a friend or family member, or you used to love it, but you just don't love it anymore. If you aren't excited about how you are spending your time, then you may need to put in a boundary there and not do that thing anymore. Sometimes there isn't a warning, and you fall directly into the trap. Below are a few common traps that I've seen leaders fall into time and time again. Use your workbook and the Red Flags and Traps worksheet to identify one trap that you've fallen into in the last month and what you can do differently going forward. Trap number 1, ruminating. A trap that can sap your energy or your emotion is ruminating. Some people ruminate or think about something over and over. A meeting that they didn't think went well, or a conversation in which they wish they had said something differently. It replays over and over. When I find myself doing this, I take action on something, anything, to get out of the loop and make forward progress. Ruminating about a meeting? I jot down all the things I'm worried about to get them out of my head and make a plan to tackle the things I can control the next day. Trap number 2. Adhering to the company culture at your expense. The culture of an organization is based on what it values. The culture is the written and unwritten rules and behaviors. One trap is to always put the company culture ahead of your own behaviors. Trap number 3. Not consistently using systems that support your boundaries. When you don't use the systems you know that work, it will be harder to uphold your boundaries and live your values. I gave the example earlier of being in a company culture emphasizing FaceTime when I needed to keep a boundary of family time and have different hours. I fell into that trap for months, even when it was possible to navigate something that would be beneficial to me and still work within the company culture. In many organizations, there is a culture of yes. Yes to customers, yes to partners, yes to everything. That can lead to a lot of overburdened and overworked employees. Can you have boundaries within a company that has a culture of yes? I think you can. Don't fall into the trap of culture at the expense of your boundaries every time. We keep a family calendar that integrates my work travel, my husband's work travel, our personal travel, all the kids' appointments, and their schedules. It is also where we plan out our dinners for the month. If I don't integrate commitments into the calendar, then something will go awry. We may double book someone or overcommit ourselves. It is a great visual of the weeks to come. It also gives the kids something to look at to let them know what's going on for the week and to set expectations for their days. Our oldest son started participating in clubs after school on Thursdays when he was 7. He was placed in a yoga class, which was great for him. He was learning how to breathe and do some new stretching poses. On a regular day, he got picked up from school at 3. On Thursdays, he got picked up after yoga at 4. We live near the school and can walk there to drop him off. Usually, Brian walked him to school and our nanny walked to pick him up. One week, my mother came into town to help me because I had been sick earlier in the week, and Brian was traveling for work internationally. It was a normal Thursday. I was working from home and was on Zoom calls all afternoon. Our youngest son was taking an afternoon nap, and my mom was downstairs. Because my mother was visiting, our nanny went home early. I was on my Zoom call and saw a number come through on my personal cell phone that I didn't recognize. So I sent it to voicemail. I'll check it later, I thought. About 20 minutes later, someone else called on the same number, and it went to voicemail. I checked it to see if I recognized the number, and I didn't. The third time it rang, I excused myself from the meeting and checked the message. It was 3:50 p.m. at this point. I listened to the voicemail and my heart sank. It was the school calling to ask me when we would be picking up my second grader. It was Wednesday. It was not Thursday. He was done at 3, and I was not there to pick him up. Full-on panic ensued. My stomach dropped. I fell directly into the trap of not following the systems that support my boundaries. I didn't put it on my calendar. I was minding my own business, being present in my work. I ended my meeting and ran to the school. As I sprinted the block and a half, this short distance felt like the farthest I'd ever experienced as a mother. I ran as fast as I could to go get my baby. As I ran, I tried to call the school back to let them know I'd be there in a minute, but no one answered the phone. I was there within 3 minutes, 3:53 p.m. I got buzzed into the office. There he was, bebopping around with his yellow Lego backpack on. He looked at me and said, "Mom, what have you been doing for 53 minutes? You are late." I grabbed him in the biggest bear hug ever, and I told him, "I mixed up the days and thought it was Thursday, yoga day. I'm so sorry, love." I thanked the school administrator profusely and apologized again. They left at 4:00 p.m. every day. What happened if they couldn't get a hold of you or your emergency contacts? Did they call the police? I have no idea. But I was 7 minutes away from that, and oh my God, the guilt. I'm definitely not living up to my values of family if I'm forgetting to pick up my kid from school. I didn't use the systems that I know work for me. I didn't put it on the calendar. The schedule changed because the variables changed. I didn't adjust and update the calendar. I know what works. Systems to help me put in my boundaries. Use what works. Move on. Don't hold on to the guilt. Give yourself grace instead. No ruminating about parent fails. Learn, hug your kiddo, and move on to the next day. By being aware of the red flags and traps, you can become more attuned to your values and work through conflict faster. Sometimes we mess up, and we need to do the hard work of being accountable for our actions. I've had to do that many times with my family and colleagues, including once with my team member, Yvonne. The highs and lows of learning. Yvonne was an amazing presenter, facilitator, and team leader. She was basically a rock star. I was lucky to have her on my team because she was sought out by other leaders often. If there was a new project, they would request Yvonne. If there was a complex problem to solve, was Yvonne available? If there was a hard conversation to have with an external partner, could Yvonne be involved? Our team had an upcoming meeting, and our senior sponsor of the initiative would kick off the call. Yvonne had spearheaded the work on the project. She built new processes and partnered with multiple departments to get it done. It was a common practice in the company to have a sponsor kick off the call to show support and then hand it over to the team member to cover the specifics of the initiative and answer questions. I had a regular meeting with the senior sponsor and prepped him with talking points while explaining what the session would entail as one of many action items in our update for the week. I wasn't on the kickoff call because I was leading another meeting at the same time. After the call, the senior sponsor reached out to me and told me that it had gone well and that Yvonne had been great, as usual. I pinged Yvonne to tell her about the great feedback from the senior sponsor. "Interesting," she replied. "How do you think it went?" I asked. "It was okay. I will follow up with you later on it." Uh-oh, I thought. Something was off. Yvonne and I were able to catch up at the end of the day on Zoom. "So how did the meeting go?" I asked. "He didn't use the bullet points you gave him, like at all." Ugh. We had walked through it together previously, and he hadn't stuck to the messaging when delivering it to the audience. "What did he say?" I asked, wanting to know all the details. "He said that the program was part of his strategy from last year." "Well," I jumped in immediately. "I mean, it is, from his perspective. It does align with his strategy. So I get where he is coming from. You know, sometimes he doesn't always stay on topic, even when we give him speaking points," I explained. Yvonne looked defeated. There was a long pause. When he described it as part of his strategy, it made me feel like he was taking credit for my work. It was hard on that call. Those were my ideas and my work, Yvonne explained. My heart sank. "What you just said is hard to hear too," started Yvonne. There was another long pause, a silence as we both took it in. "I just did the same thing, just now, by defending him and explaining it to you." "Well, yes. Yes, you did." Another long pause. "I am so sorry, Yvonne. I should be listening, not explaining. Thank you for sharing your experience with me. And for your honesty, I'm so sorry," I said apologetically. "Do you want me to talk to him about it?" "No, I don't think so, but let me think about it." I had let her down. I didn't listen when she was confiding in me. She had trusted me enough to tell me, and then I had caused more harm by explaining why he did what he did. I am so grateful to Yvonne for her leadership, for trusting me, and for teaching me. The high point of that conversation was that she trusted me enough to tell me how she felt. The low point was that I wasn't listening to her perspective. I was explaining, not listening. Through unlearning and relearning through conflict, you may have feelings about the past when you weren't living your own values. Did you do everything you should have done? Did you stand up for this person? Did you give feedback to that horrible boss? You can't go back, but you can unlearn, relearn, and do better. You can know it isn't always about you. I'm now unlearning many things in my journey into anti-racism, things like centering and intent. We can thank others for teaching us, but it is on us to unlearn, then to take action. Reading books to bring awareness is a start, but taking the next action is what's best, even when you know you'll do it wrong or get called out. Better to keep learning than not living by the values you know are right. Your discomfort is an easy price to advocate for what's right. Learn, try, do better, repeat. One of the best ways I've learned to grow from a hard discussion or conflict is through a high-low exercise. The exercise is a way to learn from situations for continual growth. We are never done learning. It is essentially an after-action review, or what a project manager may call a postmortem, the meeting you have after a project ends to see what you learned from it. How often do you even have those action after reviews? Probably not often enough. Using the high-low exercise can be beneficial to debrief an individual conflict or a group conflict. I once used it as a way to get a working group back on track. There was a project team made up of colleagues from multiple departments. Some team members were new, while others had been on the project team for multiple months. We were at a turning point in the project, where some team members wanted to move forward with one solution and others wanted a different solution. There was also mounting tension, as some members felt like specific team members had hidden agendas and they had lost trust in them. I received feedback from a few of the team members and suggested that we all come together as a team to reset expectations. For our kickoff activity, we used the high-low exercise. We sat around the room at a big oval conference table and each brought our individual perspectives on the high points of the project to date, the low points, and the impacts at each stage. As each person presented their experience, every team member listened to differing points of view. Someone's high point for one reason was another's low point for different reasons. A lot was metaphorically put out on the table that day. The walls that some team members had put in place started to crumble, and trust started to build back where the walls once stood. The team agreed to reset and move forward from a place of trust. Go to the high-low exercise in your workbook. Think about a situation in which you weren't living your values. What was the situation? What were the highs of the situation? When were you living your values? What were the lows of the situation? When did you feel at your worst, and what was happening? What is your biggest takeaway to live your values more consistently? By learning from inner and outer conflict, you can learn from your experiences, continue to grow, and do better next time to live in alignment with your values. By exploring conflict in this section, you learned how to recognize red flags and traps, speak up when you see them, sit with being called out when you miss them, and how to move forward with your values intact when conflict happens.
Now that you have a few more tools, I'm challenging you to utilize one of these this week. How did you use your values? Where did they show up in conflict? What's more interesting for you to think about right now, internal conflict or external conflict? I invite you to check out the tools in the Values First book and workbook. You can grab all of the worksheets that I talked about in this episode and in this series by going to thecatchgroup.com/valuesfirst to get the free workbook. Maybe you'll be working through these exercises again and seeing new insights or themes or learnings that come up for you, or maybe you'll be using these for the first time. Either way, by utilizing these tools, you'll be grounding yourself and your team in your values to support and navigate through conflict that you're facing. So join me next week when we talk about how to sustain your values. How do you keep them for the long run? Also, remember that the Values First Book Club discussion guide is also available at thecatchgroup.com. Feel free to utilize those discussion questions to have a conversation with your team about how to use their values to manage through conflict. Until then, remember, your leadership belongs here. You belong in the C-suite. I want to thank you so much for listening to the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. If you are enjoying this content, please remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts. By leaving a review, you are helping others find this content.
We will be featuring 5-star reviews on air in upcoming episodes. Editing and support for the podcast is done by S&E Podcast Management. To get more tips and tools to help you live a life guided by your values, go to thecatchgroup.com. Keep your boundaries and take care.